One chapter of Space Marines that has been stuck in my head as of late are the Carcharodons, a very obscure and mysterious chapter of Space Marines. Not online though. Online, they are incredibly popular, practically meme-worthy. That tends to happen if the Space Marines look cool enough, or at least have a cool enough concept. And the Carcharodons are definitely cool enough. They are spooky. They fight in complete silence and are on some kind of a crusade, a penitent crusade to redeem themselves, but nobody knows what it is. So they're a fleet-based chapter, just going out into the galaxy on some epic quest that nobody knows about. That fills me with a lot of creative juices. And I've seen some Carcharodon armies and models painted up online, but for the most part, what I've seen is kinda fine. I want to make a really good Carcharodon. This is probably the best picture of a Carcharodon online, and they are fine. Sort of gray Space Marines that are very much 30k looking dudes. At least they're wearing Mark 5 armor. Digging into the Space Marine Intercessor sprue once again, I grab the parts to make up a dude, and I use super glue for speed. And I've heard some folks argue that you should never use super glue on plastic minis, and I wholeheartedly disagree. Yes, plastic glue might be stronger in theory, but for larger connections, super glue is more than strong enough, and it saves me a lot of time as it dries practically instantly. I carved off the Imperialis on his chest and got to work Mark 5ing his armor. On his leg, I dragged my hobby knife down the length of his shin very softly, leaving me with a very subtle score marks that are only visible when the light hits it just right. And I use these score marks to help guide me to make little dents with the point of my hobby knife. Inside of these dents, I'm gonna add rivets, and to make those rivets, I'm gonna use nail art beads. These are tiny little glass balls, perfect for this. Using my dents as a guide, I opened up these holes with a 1mm drill bit, just going deep enough to make a little indent, and then I sanded these down to get rid of any burrs created by the drilling and knocking down the score marks. Then I poured myself a drop of Elmer's glue and a drop of ultra thin super glue. I took a toothpick and dripped it into the Elmer's glue to make it just tacky enough to pick up the glass beads, and then I carefully dipped the beads into the super glue and then carried them over to his leg and pressed them into place. This was a little tedious, but not too difficult. The hardest part was hunting down all the beads that were about 1mm in size. The nail art set comes with a bunch of different sizes that are all mixed together. Once I had his fancy nail done, I went and grabbed him a bolter. Drilling out the barrel with my hobby drill, I carved off the symbol on the side of the bolter. I appreciate that Games Workshop adds these symbols, but I often don't want them. That big flat square is a great spot to do some painting. The Intercessor kit comes with 3 different versions of magazines, and I decided to do something a little different. I took a banana mag and sliced off the scope. After a little cleaning and gluing, I slotted it into place, and I like how it looks. It gives that classic bolter vibe while still keeping the Primaris scale and the cool tactical rail. I glued his arms on with plastic glue for the strength and because it lets me shift the arms around a little before it's set so I can get the exact pose I want. Each different glue has its purpose. Then I added shoulders, and a Mark 5 shoulder fits him perfectly, and on the other side, I want to do something a little special and old school. I grabbed the sprue and carved off one of the parts number 69 shoulder pads, and then carved away the base rim, turning it into a Mark 6 shoulder where it's all smooth. For stuff like this, I love fine grain sanding twigs. It's a tool I use every day. To finish off his decorations, I want a little shoulder shield, but not a modern 40k medieval shield. I think a nice round one will help him look more old school heresy. I found that the tip of a pen is about the right size for the diameter, so I traced it and then carved out the rough shape of the circle with my nippers, and then clamped it down with some flat pliers and sanded it nice and round, and then I glued it down to his shoulder. Then I put on a Mark 10 Tacticus head and backpack, and then my little baby shark is ready for painting. And by the way, EOB dice available at EonsOfBattle.com. So the Carcharodons wear Mark 5 Space Marine armor, often called the Heresy Mark, and the reason for that is because they don't have anything else. After the Horus Heresy, most Loyalist Space Marines were wearing Mark 5 armor, which is just a cobble together of whatever types of armor that they can get their hands on. And this guy, he's got some elements of Mark 5, but really he's wearing Mark 10 Tacticus armor. So does that mean that this is not a good representation of the Carcharodons? Not at all. In fact, I think it enhances the effect. It all comes down to how the Carcharodons do. In the world of Warhammer, even beset on all sides by horrible monsters and traitorous traitors, the Space Marines are actually pretty well stocked. All of their kit comes from the Adeptus Mechanicus, and they can recruit from their planets. The Carcharodons, though, can't, because they're pretty much a renegade Space Marine chapter. Not traitor, but renegade. They don't actually have a chapter homeworld, they're fleet-based, and nobody likes or trusts them. So the way that they get new recruits is every once in a while, they'll come down to a planet and just take everybody. And they kind of do the same thing when it comes to war gear. Famously, after the Badab War, the Carcharodons fought alongside the Mantis Warriors, and after the battle, the Mantis Warriors said, Carcharodons, you can replenish some of your troops from one of our chapter planets. And the Carcharodons, big thumbs up. They headed over there and took everybody. And then on the way out, they raided the chapter supply and took everything. They took everything that wasn't nailed down, and then they just skipped town. That is how the Carcharodons do, and that is how this guy can be a proper Carcharodon while wearing Mark 10 Tacticus armor. Now, in terms of 10th edition 40k, I'm a Black Templar player, but I do love working with other chapters and kind of tinkering with the idea of like, what would I do if I played this Space Marine chapter? I'm still working through some of the army lists in my brain, but for right now, it is time to get this guy on a base. For the base, I want to do something tried and true, a good old-fashioned cork tower. Cork towers are really quick and really good looking, but not completely easy to pull off. The trick is to make sure that it doesn't look like craft store cork. I slobbered the base in super glue and then stuck down some 1/8 inch cork, tearing it up so it was nice and round. Then I looked at where my Marine's feet are gonna go and marked those spots so I can make sure that there will be cork under his feet for the second layer. I used the point of my hobby knife to chisel away some cork, and then I glued down some more layers, and then the important part is turning the base sideways so I can chisel out the cork seam on the side so that there's no unsightly line between the two layers. After that, I spread on a little bit of texture paste to hide the perfect flatness of the cork. I didn't wait for the texture paste to dry. As long as I don't stick my fingers in it, it should hold up to painting just fine. And I gave the whole model a black prime. Then I base coated him with the airbrush using a dark gray, and then after that a zenithal of light gray to brighten him up, and then a wash. Now for that wash, I actually found an old bottle of Nuln Oil. I think this might be Nyx, but I globbed it on and remembered why I like the new formula of Nuln Oil a little bit better. The old one leaves a very slight gritty matte texture, where the new one is very smooth and dries a little satiny. Not at all a big deal, just a little trip down painting memory lane. Now for the thing that makes Carcharodons who they are, these weird geometric patterns that are on their armor. Although their homeworld is unknown and are now a nomadic fleet-based chapter, there must be some kind of cultural significance to their heraldry of the shark and the markings on their armor. It's just one more of the things that makes them mysterious. I went back to my high school brain of doodling in the corners of my notebooks while not paying attention in class to help me draw these abstract designs. I picked all the parts of his armor that I could fit a little something and I drew in there. Now for the symbol. The Carcharodons have the symbol of a shark, an ancient Terran predator. I drew this on with some thin down white paint and I pretty much nailed it. But then I looked at the model and realized it was way too small. I covered it up and tried again, and at least now I have a little experience. The second try did turn out much better, and much bigger. I painted on the eyes and the little gills, and boom, a cute little sharky shark. My little shark is swimming along, and I think I have nailed what I would do for a Carcharodon army and make it feel unique to play on the tabletop. Now, I'm actually gonna be combining two very not particularly considered good things, and that is the Stormlands Task Force detachment, the Biker detachment, and probably one of the least popular Space Marine units, the Reavers. When you take these two not so good things and you put them together, I'm not sure if they become good, but they certainly become very funny. The Stormlands Task Force gives you army-wide advance and charge, which is very nice, and in my opinion, very Carcharodon-y. The Carcharodons do not like drawn-out engagements. In fact, they can't even do it because they lack a lot of the resources of other Space Marine chapters. So they sit around and wait for the perfect moment to fatally strike their opponents. And that is where Reavers come in. Reavers are an often overlooked Space Marine unit, and they're usually overlooked because they don't shoot good and they don't fight great. But picture this, 3 10-man squads of Reavers with attached lieutenants in Phobos armor. All of a sudden you got 3 Space Marine bricks, and they're Space Marines, they're hard to shift, that can scout 6 inches, then move 6 inches, then advance d6 inches, and then they can decide to shoot with their guns, and if they do, the lieutenant's ability kicks in, which lets them, after they shoot, do another d6 inch move, so they can move really, really far, and if they decide to charge, which they can from the detachment ability, then the Reaver ability kicks in, which makes whatever they charged take a battle shock test at -1, which is kind of weird, and is really gonna throw your opponent off, because all of a sudden they're taking battle shock tests without having like lost units. And it gets even wackier because for some reason, all Reaver weapons have precision. So if they've got any sort of characters like war bosses or archons that, like, you know, they have battle plans in mind, all of a sudden you can attack them with 10 Reavers and then just be like, hey, that orc war boss hiding in that squad, how about that orc war boss take 17 saves right now? That's probably gonna wipe any character. Sure, the squad is gonna get to punch back, but that character is gone and the unit is probably battle shook from the -1 test. That feels very Carcharodon-y because your opponent had something in mind for this battle, and now turn 1, it is not going that way. Is this a good strategy? Probably not, but man, do I want to give it a try on the tabletop. And speaking of things I want to give a try to, there's something a little missing with my Carcharodon. He's very cold and desaturated. I want to liven him up a little bit, and I want to use one of my favorite tools to do that, a little bit of ink. Inks are awesome, and this is one I've been using a lot lately, Raw Sienna. And it's a semi-transparent color, so it tints, but it also very subtly covers. And that coverage, when applied over stuff, slightly blends them together. Spraying this delicately over the mini nearly instantly warmed it up and gives his armor an aged appearance. There's only a few things left to do on this guy, and one of those things is to paint all his balls with a lovely warm gold. This looks lovely next to the warmth of his armor, and I also hit his helmet tubes and the outside of his circle. On the inside, I free-handed a shark's mouth. At least it looks a little like a shark's mouth, and it's so small I did my best and I'm not fussing with it anymore. And I painted all the gun parts of his gun with gunmetal, throwing a no-oil wash over that. Then for his eyes, Space Marine eyes are usually a spot where you splash out some ultra-vibrant primary colors, but instead for my shark boy, you know, the thing about a shark is it's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. After that, I sponged on some silver to give him some paint chips, as his armor is probably not cleaned on a regular basis. Just a little bit of warmth is exactly what my Carcharodon needed. Transparent inks have saved my butt so many times when it comes to painting. Whenever I'm working on something and I'm just like, I didn't paint it green enough, I can just take one of these bad boys, throw it in my airbrush, and then pss, 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 and then it's perfectly green. I love it. It's probably my second favorite hobby tool. My first, of course, is EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like our new Nick and Jay dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. And for the month of September, we here at Eons of Battle are proud to announce the Whimsical Cottages, fantasy buildings perfect for any game with a ye olde flair. Move your models around the quaint homes, the roomy houses, or set up shop in the tavern. With this terrain, you can make an entire town, complete with pumpkins, giant mushrooms, and trees to really fill out a game board. It is time to tackle this guy's base, and typically with miniatures, if you have a dark colored model, you want a light colored base, and a light colored model wants a dark colored base. This guy is definitely more in the dark range, so I want to do something nice and bright. And nice and bright will also set me up really nicely for a little special effect I want to do at the end. I grabbed some desaturated yellow and threw this into my airbrush with a lot of water, and I sprayed this over his base and feet really wet. I just want it to tint. The subtle zenithal overspray is already perfect, I just want to change the color a little bit. Then I broke out some similarly yellow tan pigment powder and I mixed it with water and slobbered this over the base. I love pigment powders, but they do take their sweet time drying. While I waited, I finished off the base rim with some glossy black paints, and then I grabbed some similarly white tan tufts and stuck these down, and the base is done. Looking at my finished guy, I almost forgot about the special effect, some blood. The Carcharodons are vicious in combat, and to represent this, I dipped my brush into some blood for the blood god and used a toothpick to pull back the bristles and let them spring forward, throwing the blood all over his armor. There's blood in the water, and the sharks are swimming. My Carcharodon is done, and he's a very reasonable marine. A lot of marines are like candy colors or hot rod colors, but this guy is a lovely drab gray, and he looks very properly militaristic with a little bit of nautical flair. It's really fun working on a little bit more of an obscure chapter of Space Marines because you get to make a lot more decisions. If you play Ultramarines, you can kind of, looking at the heraldry and all of the lore behind them, you can kind of make an exactly lore accurate Ultramarines army. But for something like the Carcharodons, you kind of have to make it up yourself. When the lore states that the Carcharodons show up to a battle, what does it look like? And I think it looks like this. I have been having a ton of fun theorizing and painting up some of the other Space Marine chapters, so let me know in the comments below what Space Marine chapter should I do next.